lab class, two boys mixed sugar with potassium chlorate. Then they baked it on an alcohol lamp, and then a fire went up in the air. But they were not happy for long. The principal suddenly came this way. They dumped the rest in the sink, and then a girl threw a match. The whole lab almost blew up, but the boy found the perfect fuel for his rocket. After class, he and his friends couldn't wait to test it. But this wasn't a rocket launch, it was a suicide attempt. Not only did it explode for no reason, it also went everywhere. But who would have thought that 6 months later, the boy would not only build a rocket, he also became an aerospace engineer. The boy's name is Homer. He was born in a coal mining town in America. Everyone here digs coal for a living. Homer was told from a young age that he would become a coal miner, like most people here. But Homer couldn't accept his fate. A life in the mines, living in the dark, would be no different than a life in prison. But he'd already missed his only chance to get out of town to become an athlete and go to college. Luckily, there's no such thing as a dead end. A Soviet satellite streaks across the night sky, and Homer finds his dream, and his life was about to change. The next day at dinner, he told his family what he wanted to do. "I want to build a rocket." His brother couldn't help but laugh. Homer looked down in embarrassment, but he wasn't fooling around. In the afternoon, he went straight to his partner and added 30 kickers to his flashlight. Then he lit the fuse. The mother thought the mine had collapsed and rushed over. When it turned out to be her son, he angrily reprimanded them.
I waited 6 months for the company carpenter to finally get around to putting up that fence. Didn't I tell you not to blow yourself up? Then let's not.
The failure of his first experiment didn't discourage Homer. It inspired him. He immediately went to the library to look for information. But how could there be any books on rocket making in this remote and backward place? Just when he was at a loss, he suddenly saw a schoolmaster in the distance. He must know how to make rockets.
What do you want to know about rockets?
Everything.
Well, rocketry was actually invented by the Chinese as early as 1000 AD.
As expected, Homer finally figured out how to use potassium chloride and sulfur to make rocket fuel so it wouldn't explode. Then they went to the basement of Homer's house and started to build a new rocket. On the first day, they sawed a stainless steel tube for the body of the arrow and used a broom handle to make the arrowhead. The next day, they soldered the tail with a soldering iron. The third day, they made fuel in a bowl. After a few days of hard work, the main body of the rocket was finally finished. While they were showing off with their rockets, the principal suddenly approached them. He thought it was a bunch of troublemakers causing trouble and was about to destroy their rockets. Luckily, Mr. Lee explains that the rocket is a science project that he asked his students to make, and the principal agrees to let them go. The teacher then encourages Homer to enter a national science competition. If he came in first, he'd be accepted to a prestigious university with a generous scholarship. Homer saw a way out of town. After school, he took the unfinished rocket and began his second test flight. But the rocket went out of control immediately. It flew through a group of workers and into his father's office. Homer rushed to the cloud to check the situation, only to see his father was bombed with a black face. He held the rocket in his hand and loudly reprimanded Homer. He forbids them to make fire rockets at the factory, and after that throws the rocket in the trash. The second launch fails and the partners look like they have lost their minds. They begin to have self-doubt, saying that building rockets is impossible. As descendants of miners, they should follow the rules and finish high school, graduate as a miner, and simply live out their lives, which was their destiny. Homer was angry when he heard this, but there was nothing he could do, only to hold the tools alone and continue to look for a new experimental base. He didn't realize that just after walking for a while, the others caught up with him. They asked Homer, "What are the chances of us winning the science prize?" Homer said it was only 1 in 1 million, but if we didn't try hard, we wouldn't even have a 1 divided by 1 million chance. Then the boys traveled a long way. They finally found a perfect clearing. In Homer's eyes, the coal gone Goa beneath his feet was like a storm, because this is where their dream began. The next few people imitated a professional experimental base. First, they put up the team's flag. Then they built a safe house in the center of the field. And finally, the crucial concrete launch pad. It didn't take long for the new base to be built, and they began to prepare for the third experiment. Then an older black man arrived. He's also interested in rockets. He heard that they were going to launch a rocket today, so he wanted to see it for himself. With the fuse lit, the rocket shot up into the sky with a whoosh, but the rocket misfired again and flew directly towards the black man. Luckily, The uncle quickly fell down. He was able to save his life. Afterwards, the uncle did not blame a few people. Instead, he took a closer look at the rocket. He saw the reason for the rocket's bend in the road. It turned out that the high temperature of the exhaust had melted the nozzle, so it needed better steel to withstand it. But good steel isn't cheap, and without money they had to tear down the rails. A few people used their best efforts to remove the rails, and when they did, they heard the roar of the train. But now it was too late to fix the tracks. They rushed to the front to stop the train. In the nick of time, the train ran to another track, but it was a false alarm. Several people dismantled the railroad track, dismantled a whole day, bought hundreds of rails, which only bought a good steel. They thought that the rocket could be launched smoothly after they put on a good nozzle. But no matter how they improved, the rocket always exploded for no reason. Sometimes it flew up and exploded. Sometimes it exploded in place, and sometimes it would explode azimutally, and a few times almost blew people up. Finally, the schoolmaster discovered the problem. It turned out that there were a lot of air bubbles inside the fuel, which caused the rocket to burn unevenly. While we were at a loss, Homer suddenly came up with an idea, which was to add pure alcohol to the fuel. Risking their own lives, they put pure alcohol into the fuel and stirred it, and so a new generation of rocket fuel was born. Soon after, accompanied by Mr. Xiaoli, they set out on a new mission. But when they arrived at the launch site, they found that their classmates had come to watch them make fun of them.
Homer, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. You remember that. Now go launch yourself a rocket.
Luckily, with the encouragement of his teacher, Homer didn't mind the stairs. After carefully setting up the rocket, he hid in the safe house and prepared for the test flight. With the launching device activated, the rocket took off as planned. But to everyone's surprise, the flight was perfect. Those who wanted to see the joke cheered. Even Homer's beloved goddess came to congratulate him. When he got back to school, Mrs. Ree gave him a book called Missile Design Principles. Although the teacher couldn't understand it himself, he encouraged Homer to study hard. A high school student built a rocket with his bare hands. The news was in the newspaper, but before Homer and his friends could be happy, the police came looking for them. It turns out there was a fire in a forest near the base. The police think Homer's rocket is the culprit. They couldn't confirm where the rocket crashed. The police took Homer and the others back to the station in front of the whole school. Luckily, they were underage and were not sentenced, but that was the end of their dream. Their father, who was not a fan of building rockets, had a chance to reprimand Homer. He told him to stop dreaming and wait for his successor. Homer and the others were devastated, so they burnt down the experimental base. The fire engulfed not only the hut where they witnessed the miracle, but also their unfulfilled dreams. We are all unhappy, but what can they do? Maybe this is fate, but disaster always follows disaster. That night, the coal mine collapsed. The father is still missing, along with a dozen other miners. Homer rushed over there in the rain, only to see an ambulance parked by the side of the road. Surrounded by a crowd of people, they all wanted to know what was going on in the mine. After an unknown time, his father was finally brought up. He had suffered a skull injury trying to save a few workers, but barely survived. After his father was taken away, Homer looked into the darkness of the mine. He couldn't believe that if he had been a coal miner, he would have died too. The accident took away the family's financial resources, but everything in the family belonged to the mine. According to the agreement, they had to send a man to work in the mine. Otherwise, they would take back their house. In order to give his brother peace of mind to go to college, Homer decided to take it all on himself. Upon hearing this, Mother Love couldn't accept this reality and threw the phone out the window. Soon after, Homer puts on a brand new coat and arrives at the mine in the middle of the night. As the elevator door was closed, Homer looked up at the sky again. The stars were still bright, but there was no room for a teenager's dreams. Under the ravages of reality, he had no choice but to put away the light he once had and become a man he hated. However, Homer soon familiarized himself with the work in the mine. He flaunted his muscles when his buddies came to visit. After a while, his recovering father came to work at the mine. Seeing how well Homer had done over the months, he was proud of his son for the first time.
Tell Homer I was born for this. I guess it shouldn't surprise me that you were too.
What he didn't know was that this kind of dark work was not what Homer wanted out of life. Wasn't the life Homer wanted. In order to change the status quo, he then went to Mr. Xiaoli for help. It didn't occur to him that the teacher was terminally ill. She could no longer teach, but she didn't give up on herself. Instead, she encouraged Homer to stick to his dream.
Sometimes you really can't listen to what anybody else says. You're not supposed to end up in those mines. You know why? Because I think you made other plans. friends. I want you to know something. I'm proud of you. I am.
Sometimes you really can't listen what anybody else is. You're not supposed to end up in those minds. You know why? Cause I think you made other plans. I want you to know something. When he got home, Homer thought long and hard. What's the difference between living your life like this and being a salted fish? Absolutely not. The boy opened his book on the principles of missiles. He worked on it all night, even at lunchtime. Finally, he found a way to prove his innocence, so he immediately went to the schoolmaster. It turned out that their rocket could only fire 5 kilometers, but the fire was 3 kilometers away from the launch site. Obviously, it wasn't their rocket that caused the fire. The next day, the two of them used twine as a ruler. They began to measure the rocket's expected landing point. After much searching, they finally found the rocket in a small river 2 kilometers away. Then they rushed to the school with the rocket in their arms. The principal still didn't believe Homer's explanation. Homer couldn't stand it any longer. He went straight to the podium and proved his innocence with a complicated formula. The principal was deeply impressed and decided to believe them. Afterwards, they come to the police station and realize that the fire was caused by a flare. After the incident is resolved, the principal wants Homer and the others to return to school and enter their rockets in the science fair. So they start working on their project. But while they were discussing their design, their father interrupted them. He came over and asked Homer why he was a miner. He said that working in the mines with his son was the most fun he'd ever had. He wanted his son to take his place, but Homer refused. He didn't want to go back to that prison. He wanted to get out of town and compete. When his father saw how determined Homer was, he left in anger. Their work was a big hit at the science fair. They won the championship. They qualified for the national competition. But due to time constraints and limited funds, there was only enough money for Homer to go alone. So he packed his bags overnight. The father was furious. He scolded his son for having no conscience. The father and son had a big fight and left. The next day, Homer said goodbye to his companions and boarded a bus for the race. At first, the competition went well. Homer's rocket attracted everyone's attention. People said he would win. Homer also thinks he will win the prize, so he sneaks off at night to watch a movie. But there was an accident. When Homer came back to the competition venue again, he realized that everything had been stolen. It's over. The contest is tomorrow. Where can he find the rocket? He had no choice but to call his buddies for help. Unfortunately, the workers at the mine were on strike and had taken over the workshop. There was no chance to make another rocket. When his mother heard about it, she was very worried. She went straight to the father's office and said, if you don't help your son, she'll divorce you. The father didn't want to be a bachelor, and he didn't want his son to lose all his work, so he agreed to the mother's request. He went straight to the mine workers and soon stopped the strike. And the black man helped Homer build a new rocket. His mother rushed to call him to tell him. The workers encouraged Homer. When he hung up the phone, Homer felt a surge of strength. He began to understand that his father, who was the leader of all the workers in the town, was sometimes in pain, but he still cared about himself. With the new rockets, the competition went on as normal. On the day of the judging, Homer sat in his chair very nervous, until the master of ceremonies announced that they were the winners. He was relieved that his months of hard work were not over after all. Homer slowly walked up to the podium, amidst the envious eyes of the people around him. As he made his way to the podium, there were countless prestigious schools waiting to invite him to join them. He was the center of attention, the pride of the world. Everyone came up to him, and it was like Homer had met his idol. When he got home, to thank his benefactors for helping him, Homer decided to launch one last rocket. He wanted to invite his father to watch, but his father remained aloof.
Here you met your big hero.
I know you and me don't exactly see eye to eye on certain things. Yeah, we don't see eye to eye on just about anything. But Dad, I come to believe that I got it in me to be somebody in this world. And it's not because I'm so different from you either. It's because I'm the same. I mean, I can be just as hard-headed and just as tough. I only hope I can be as good a man as you are. I mean, sure, Dr. Von Braun's a great scientist, but he isn't my hero.
Looking at his son's back, his father's eyes had long been filled with tears. He felt he owed his son too much. On the day of the rocket launch, everyone was there early. Homer thanked everyone sincerely for their help over the months. Although he looked very excited, There was always a hint of sadness on his face. Just then, a familiar figure suddenly appeared. This time his father finally came to the scene. Homer also felt the love of his father. He excitedly invited his father to launch the rocket. Then, with everyone watching, the father and son walked forward together. One of them symbolizes the past of all miners. The other symbolizes the future of a small-town boy. Both of them work together, hand in hand, to create the future glory of the town. Then the father pressed the launch button and the rocket took off. At the same time, the hopes and dreams of all the people took off. At this moment, both the workers in the mine and the people on the street looked to the sky in unison. At this moment, the father looked at his son with pride. He never thought that a small rocket could fly so fast. He also didn't realize that in his eyes, the son who was always in trouble was so outstanding. The gap between father and son was finally bridged. This is a true story. The boys all graduated from college, and they all went on to great things. Homer even got his dream of becoming an aerospace engineer for NASA, training astronauts for space flight. Homer's experience shows us that it's never the dream that's missing, it's the perseverance to the dream. Life is a long road. If you are committed to one thing, then stick to it. Don't let your life leave you with regrets.